Hello, and welcome to this illustrious week 4 of this wonderful semester. At least I think it's week 4. We are now talking about the phases of production. Because we've lost a couple of lab sessions due to, or at least one more lab session due to this virus thing. So we're going to try to do this. We're going to fill in what information we need to, and I want to make sure that you have adequate information about the phases of production. And base demo, that's right. Okay, so here we are, the phases of production. Now I put a subtitle here that I think is worth mentioning, and that is thanking or hating your past self. Now that sounds like this really esoteric thing to say, but there was actually a funny video one time on Family Guy where future Peter was punishing past Peter. He said, hey, past Peter was punishing future Peter. He was saying, look outside, I planted a tree for you. And so look, oh, it's a grown tree. Now look at your hand, I cut off your finger. That sort of thing. Well, it's kind of like that with the phases of production, because you are actually hurting or helping your future self in every one of those phases, because we as human beings travel forward into the future 1 minute per minute, and we can't go back. And so therefore, if we do something wrong in the past, we're kind of stuck with it. And so every time you come up with a good idea, future selves should look back and thank you. Thank yourself. So that's what we're talking about doing. And so there used to be this old expression in the video industry, at least the people I work with, where someone says, who's the idiot that packed the chute? Who packed the chute? That sort of thing. And the reason was because if something was missing, they had to blame somebody. And so obviously, who packed the chute? Who didn't include this? That sort of thing. And so in modern video production, even so much to some degree back then, we have to depend on ourselves first. So if you know what you're going to need, make sure it's packed. Don't leave until you're sure that you have everything. It could be as simple as that. Okay, so moving on. Why we need this? Why do we need to have the phases of production, in air quotes here? What are the phases of production? Well, they're basically kind of like an assembly line. If you go to, let's say you're making pencils. On one end of the assembly line, you got raw materials. Somewhere in the middle, you have the actual pencil being made. And somewhere on the other end, you've got pencils being packaged and shipped out. You can't switch those phases very easily. You can't ship out gigantic pieces of pencil eraser and expect people to buy them. You've got to actually make a product. And then you have to do it from there to there to there. And we'll explain why that's necessary. Okay, failing to plan is planning to fail. And I hesitate to use that phrase because it's kind of a cliche, but it's true. Most cliches actually have a lot of truth in them. And so, having worked in this field for a very long time, I can tell you that I have seen this play out so many times that I can't even count the stories I have. People coming into a production didn't plan anything and basically falling on their faces. Or basically the production simply doesn't happen because nobody planned. People who were responsible for doing that didn't do it, and they don't understand why it's not working. And sometimes it's as simple as labeling tapes and things like that. But essentially, if you want to actually do something right, you have to plan it first. And you have got to go through this same process multiple times, usually. And you can't do it all at once. That's another factor. And that's one of the main things that people don't realize. How do you get from here to there? Well, you got to start moving. But you can't teleport from North Carolina to Alaska. You've got to move a step at a time. Get on a train, get on a plane, that sort of thing. So you can't go from having a simple idea for a movie to having a completed movie the next day. At least I don't know how to do that. You've got to do it a step at a time. Every idiot has an idea. And so that's true. Lots of people have wonderful ideas. People tell you about their grandiose ideas, as they're sitting at the bar stool drinking or something like that, and they've never done any of them. Most ideas never materialize. Now, I don't say that to discourage you. It's simply a fact. Ideas are not necessary. They have no substance. They're wishes. They're fantasies. Projects start as ideas, but somebody has taken the time to make them work, to make them happen. Half-baked ideas result in madness. Meaning that if you've got part of an idea, you try to work with that part, but you don't have another component that's necessary. You create stuff that doesn't work, or you repeat mistakes that other people have done. Simply put, in 1969 we actually landed on the moon. That took a lot of thinking. It took 10 years to get from that idea to actually doing it, and that was back when we barely had the technology to do it in the first place. The greatest structures have the most powerful foundations. Think of the pyramids of Egypt that are still there, after thousands of years, because they were very well built. They cannot be toppled because everything about them was designed to last forever. But even skyscrapers, in big cities, those have to have very deep foundations. Otherwise, they wouldn't last more than a few months. So building has to start with the foundation that can support everything that happens afterwards. And the most successful plans ever taken are done a step at a time. The most successful plans you have must be done a step at a time. And each step has to be verified before you take the next. Now we start with pre-production. Now pre-production involves the foundation. As we mentioned before, the foundation is very important. This all happens during pre-production. And so this happens before you start shooting, and that's critical, and that's really how this got started. Everything that happens before you turn on a camera is all part of pre-production. And so there's a very good reason for that. And that is because talk is cheap, and thinking and planning is also cheap, meaning that you don't have to spend money on that. The moment you I'm going to start shooting a video with a camera, you're spending money. You're renting that equipment, or maybe you purchased the equipment. But one way or another, you're hiring somebody. Usually in most productions, you're spending some money. You're renting something. You're leasing a place. You're somehow moving a bunch of people into a certain facility that somehow or other somebody's paying for, and you can't be there forever. Whereas you can spend months, sitting in front of your computer typing out your plans and stuff like that to make this go perfectly smoothly. Pre-production requires no tangible resources. Really, you don't even necessarily need a computer. People used to write on pen and paper with these things, or just format some sort of documents. And so, and even if it does need a computer, so what? You just type on Notepad if you can't afford a word processor. Okay, pre-production can be done in a leisurely manner if done right. Now, the moment I say that, you think, oh, we can spend all the time in pre-production. Well, you can if you don't already have a deadline. If you have a deadline, you got to start pre-production immediately, and the first thing you need to do is figure out how much time you have for pre-production. Because if you got a deadline, pre-production is to plan to be done by that time. Now, if you're making a major motion picture that hasn't even been sold yet, let's say, then you could plan, years in advance. You could spend, months or even years in pre-production if that's the way the flow of it is going, and maybe that's the right thing to do. It depends on when you want to be done. But typically in the industry, you are given a deadline, and part of your job is to make sure that you're done by that deadline. And I'm going to say something that may sound a bit controversial. Most deadlines that I have seen are reasonable, meaning that very rarely does somebody come up to you and say, we need a multi-million-dollar video produced, and we need it by next week. Yeah, that may happen sometimes, but most of the time, you are given a very reasonable deadline, maybe several months, and you don't even look at the idea until maybe a month before it's due. And I'm talking about professionals, not students. And so beware that if you are rushed, usually it's not the fault of the person, it's not the fault of the client. Or maybe it is, maybe the client was the one that was procrastinating. But really, in a perfect world, we'd have plenty of time to do these things. They'd all come out perfectly. But we don't live in a perfect world. Okay, pre-production must be thorough. You got to think of everything. And that's why it's always good if you have the time, because somehow you'll think, you know what, we never talked about audio. What microphones are we going to need? How are we going to arrange the audio? What are the acoustics like? That sort of thing. Errors in pre-production lead to missed or rescheduled shooting days, wasted money, confusion, and misplaced or missing resources. And the reason I'm telling you this is because the nature of pre-production is to get ready for production. When you end pre-production, you should have a shooting script in hand. You should have a perfectly scripted show so you know what you're trying to get, or who you're trying to interview and things like that. And then you should be able to walk out into the production field, set up and shoot with no real difficulty. I mean, in theory, it should work. Now, if somehow there was an error in pre-production, it could be you're going in without an adequate script, and you've got holes in the script that have to be filled later, which you may not be able to. Or you're going to a location and find out that nobody has given you permission to go there, which can be a problem. Or maybe you sent resources somewhere else. Maybe you're going there and you don't have your props. Maybe your props are somewhere else. Things like that. Those things were not properly scheduled. Or maybe your actor doesn't show up. Oh, I thought it was supposed to be next week. That could be a pre-production error. And so those are the sorts of things that go wrong with pre-production. And the reason why it's important to nip those in the bud is because if you're renting equipment, the people you're renting the equipment from don't care whether you use it or not. It's all right with them if you rent the equipment for 6 months and leave it in your garage as long as they get paid for the 6 months. And so when you have the equipment, really it's only you that decide how you're using it. So that's important to understand. And the same thing is true of locations. If you shoot at a location where you're paying, maybe $1,000 a day to be in there for whatever reason, and let's say you go there and nobody shows up, and they say, well, we got to come back tomorrow. Well, that's another $1,000. Sorry, but they couldn't book something else into that facility while you were there doing nothing. That's just the way it is. And bad pre-production can only lead to a bad finished product. Because if you run out of money before you're done with production because you did badly in pre-production, then you're going to be missing stuff. Everybody's going to be mad. You may actually be in legal trouble depending on how big the production is, and you may not be able to finish. It could be the project just gets canceled outright. They say, look, we're going to cut our losses here. Too bad. And so that's why pre-production is important. Okay, so what is pre-production? What is done during pre-production? The idea development and the brainstorming. Now that should be a relatively easy thing to understand. Idea development. So therefore, like ideas, everybody's got ideas. But in order to make them into something that's saleable, you have to massage the idea, make it work, find out whether or not the idea is a complete idea, and take it from there. Then proposal. Make the idea more concrete. So for example, let's say you've got an idea for doing, let's say we want to do a program about baseball. Well, the proposal, it could be a documentary about baseball. It could be a drama about baseball. It could be something else along those lines. And then you've got to come up with how long it's going to be, what the likely audience will be, and other aspects of it that may be kind of amorphous when it was just an idea. And so when you were thinking about the idea about baseball, what did it look like? That maybe you got to go back there and figure out what are we talking about making, because somebody else may have a completely different idea. And the point is that now it isn't just your idea, now it's your entire production team on the same page. Scripting. Now the script is the first real product, meaning that before you go into production, you have to have something tangible. You've got to send the script to your actors, to your talent. If you've got interview questions, sometimes the talent will want to see those before they agree to interview you. All of that stuff is part of the script. And the beautiful thing about this is once you've written that script, you can always refer back to it. It's a tangible thing. It's the first product. And so let's say that everything completely blows up and you aren't able to go into production. If you've got the script, 10 years later, you can pick up that script and produce it. Talent scouting. That's one of the fun parts of pre-production. That's where you are literally interviewing people to be interviewed, or interviewing actors, screening actors. And you can have some wonderful times finding the best people possible to build to represent you in your production work. Scheduling. That's one of the hardest things. That goes under what we call producing work. Somebody's got to schedule all these meetings. Somebody's got to do all of the legwork necessary to make all of this happen. And that is the most thankless job you will ever see. Someone's on the phone all day coordinating all this stuff. That is very stressful work, and it can take a lot of time. And there are some things that are just hard to schedule. Plus, if you've ever tried to get 10 people in one room at the same time, you know what I'm talking about. Budgeting. How much is this going to cost? Now you think, well, you know, I'm in school now, I'll just use all the equipment for free. And yeah, maybe you do, but at some point or another, you're going to have to provide something, like whether it's food for fuel, to drive from here to there. Maybe you got to rent a vehicle. Maybe we don't have the right camera for it. You got to rent something or buy something. You got to feed everybody. So budgeting all that ahead of time makes it a lot easier. Maybe you've got to talk to your team members and figure out where this money is going to come from. Or maybe you've got a source. If you're doing a project for somebody, maybe you can come up with a figure that they will give you to make it happen. And again, producing work is the term we use for coordinating all of these different things, making sure you've got all the props, making sure anything that needs to be bought is bought, making sure that anyone that needs to be scheduled knows where they're supposed to be and when, and knows how much they're going to get paid so that nobody's complaining. Now, the other thing that sometimes gets missed is what we call the site survey. And this is another thing that you're going to thank yourself for. If you know you're going to be shooting in a particular location, go there first. Go there and look around. Make sure you know what you're getting into. Let me tell you why you want to do that. Now, let's say you've got this beautiful office that you plan to shoot in. And then you're there for 5 minutes and this big loud train goes by. And you say, wow, that's noisy. And so you're in the middle of a take, you had to start again, and then 10 minutes later, another train goes by. And then you figure out, you just got a location that's got a noisy train. The people there have tuned it out. They don't really think of it anymore. And so maybe you need to know about that ahead of time. Maybe you need to find somewhere else. Let's say you've got a fluorescent light system that's got this horrible buzzing sound. You should know about that because maybe you can fix it. Or maybe the room's got an echo. Maybe you need to put up blankets or something to deaden some of those bad acoustics. Or let's say there's a lighting issue that you can deal with. Know about these things ahead of time. Where's the electricity? Even today, you need electricity to run lights. And so make sure you know where that is. Make sure you know where the fuse box is or the breaker box, whatever they have. And so that's just good producing work. Figure out ahead of time where you're going to be setting the equipment. And the moment you do that, you put yourself in a better position than if you hadn't. Now, the production phase is where you're actually creating your project. That is when you're done with the planning, you're actually doing it, and usually at that point, things speed up a lot. Because, again, you can be laid back and relaxed during the pre-production phase if you do it right, but once the production phase starts, that's the time when you got to get up and move really quickly because time is money, and that has been proven again and again. So that's when you're making the actual video. And so there's nothing that the actual video is going to be that doesn't get created during the production phase. Because in the pre-production phase, all you've got is a script. So that alone isn't going to get you very far. So all principal photography has to be shot at this point. Now, principal photography is photography that involves your main talent, your actors, the people you're interviewing. Now, B-roll, which is not principal photography, can really be shot anytime. Let's say, for example, one time I was shooting a video and somebody talked about somebody throwing a rock into the water. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if we had a video image of a rock rippling in the water? And so we went out and shot one. And that wasn't a big deal. It didn't take all that long. But we didn't have to shoot it during the time we were shooting all the important stuff. That was the sort of thing we didn't have to do. On the other hand, if we wanted to see the principal actor doing something or the principal interviewee doing something, we had to shoot that then because we were there and we didn't want to have to come back. And most of the money is spent during production. Don't waste it. Make it all count because, once again, you're spending it whether you're doing it right or wrong, because most of this stuff is not a question of whether you're satisfied with the product. It's whether or not whoever is providing you with this has actually given you that. And so if you rent a car, for example, it doesn't matter if you've ever driven anywhere with it. You gotta bring it back when it's due. And you can drive 1,000 miles, you can drive 2 miles, it doesn't matter. Okay, most of the risks are taken. This is the other thing. If you're going to have to buy insurance, this is where you would buy insurance. So, are you going to do something that could get you in trouble? You know, are you going to get sued? Don't do something that can get you in trouble. Don't get killed. Be careful of what you do. You know, if you're going to be shooting on top of a building, really consider whether or not you've taken the safety precautions, hypothetically, or something like that. Take care of your crew. Make sure your crew is comfortable. Make sure your talent is comfortable. Don't make them angry at you before you ask them to do creative work. That is a very bad idea. Make sure that when they leave the set that day, they say, wow, that was a nice person to work with. I had a really good experience. Because if they enjoyed it, chances are they did their best work. Now, even professionals can do their best work if they don't enjoy it. But you can be pretty sure that just about anybody is going to do a little bit better if they're happier. Okay, be thoughtful and determined. Be thorough and determined, rather. Meaning that if you're going to a location to get a shot, there's absolutely no reason to go there if you're not going to get the shot. Meaning that if you haven't got the shot, don't leave. Stay there until you get the shot. You know, and even if you have to go there early in the morning, waiting for the shot, you know, do that. But don't leave without it. Don't give up, because if you give up, then you lose the shot. And if that was important, you're stuck. Don't leave. You remember, you can't go back. That's what he said. If you're thorough and determined, you can't always go back. Every once in a while you can, but that costs you money. Mistakes made here echo in post-production and only get worse, meaning that if you go into post-production without all of the footage, you're never going to really recover from that. There's always going to be something that was second best. And oftentimes that also means something else will be second best too, and third best and fourth best. And eventually it's going to contaminate the project. So there's only so good it can get. Bad or mediocre production can only lead to a bad finished product. And that should be obvious, meaning that if you got camera shake, if your shots are unfocused, you can't refocus the camera in post-production. Sorry, but you can't. You also can't fabricate actual footage that isn't really there. All you can do is dress up and minimize mistakes, no matter what anyone tells you. Now, post-production is in some ways the most interesting and fun part of the production process, and I'll admit it's my favorite. This is when you basically are creating something. And it depends entirely on production. Now, the problem there is if you weren't the one producing, then you may not have a lot of control over that. If you work as an online editor, you're oftentimes given a sow's ear and you're asked to make a silk purse. That's just the way it is. But if you were the producer and you were there during the production process, you should have what you need to make this work. You can't reshoot the video in the editing room. Now, again, in post-production, every once in a while there's things you can shoot, usually studio stuff and things like that, small things. But you can't really do much about principal photography. If the principal photography was bad, the principal photography was bad. And that's just the way it is. Okay, here, errors in pre-production and production snowball. And that is to say that they only get worse, meaning that if you made some mistakes in pre-production where you didn't get the right actor, for example, you're never going to be able to fix that, because then everything that you shot with that actor is going to be bad. You can't make that actor good in post-production. You're stuck. And so if you've done your pre-production well and you got a better actor than your production, you wouldn't be working around having a bad actor and trying to shoot 40 takes of each thing to get them to sound halfway marginal. And then in post-production, then what are you supposed to do with it? Just find the best of those 40 takes, which is going to take you 5 times as long. Whereas if you'd done it right the first time, it would work out a lot better. Now, the product must morph based on the materials you have to work with. So it could be that you have a whole scene you've got to get rid of because it just wasn't shot well. And so then you've got to change the script after you've shot it. And it could be that you can get away with it. Sometimes you can, but usually it leaves a stain. And post-production is for fine-tuning and finishing. That's where you're supposed to be, doing all the detail work. Things that like the shading, as they call it, making the audio that much better, audio sweetening, and all those things, which you can do, but you can focus on that. There's this expression that people use way too often. We'll fix it in post. You ever hear that one? If you haven't watched too many movies, but someone says, "Hey, we'll fix it in post." What they mean is, we'll fix it in post-production. We'll go to some poor editor and say, "Here, fix this," and somehow they'll make it work. And I kid you not, there was a professional video person whose seminar I attended who bragged about this. Basically, he never white balanced his camera, so he would leave production deliberately with virtually awful video, because he knew that with digital technology you can improve on it in post-production. Now, it's true that if you have a lot of resources behind you, you can, but it's never going to be as good as if it was shot right in the first place. I'm sorry, but it's not. All the time in the world to get it right. So that's one of the only, what can be an advantage of post-production, depending on how much time you left yourself to do it. But in theory, let's say that you turn in your assignment, but you say, you know what, I want this for my demo reel, so I'm going to keep re-editing it and make it better because I'm not done with it yet. So you technically could have all the time in the world to perfect your stuff, in which some people do. Now, post-production, once again, post-production starts with logging, the actual mechanics of it. And this is important. If you're doing post-production, you only have to work with the footage. The footage is what you have. Make sure you know where it is. Organize it. Know what you have and where it is. Because if you don't know what you have, there's no way you can do it. If you don't even know what you have, you're basically looking at your footage while you're spending $150 an hour in a professional editing suite. And if you don't know where it is, then you're also in trouble too. Make the decisions before you edit. By the time you actually start editing, it's a lot easier if you know what you're going to do, if you know ahead of time what it's going to look like. Editing time can be expensive. Even today it can be. It's true you have access to all of these programs, but sometimes you need some more quality horsepower behind you. You need bigger facilities that actually still exists. And sometimes you're working with somebody else's facilities. Post-production B-roll, yes, you can create some studio shoots and things like that. That would possibly augment what you've already shot, but you can never replace bad principal photography. Graphics, animation, and effects. That's where you can, especially if you plan these out ahead of time, you can do some wonderful things. You can go into After Effects and you can make somebody glow, and if you're doing a science fiction movie, you can have things shimmer and disappear, all these wonderful things. Believe it or not, you can do that with the tools you have right in front of you right now. Seriously, you can. And then you can also do a music mix down, meaning that you can take your audio and make it right or left channel. You can bring in some nice stereo music. You can put the whole thing into 5.1 surround sound if you want. So you have that ability. And you can do that in post-production. You can have it appear like someone's talking behind you and things like that if you want to. And of course, then you go into what's called formatting and distribution. So you've got your finished product end to end. You've got your mix down. So you've got a video that where the audio is all set. So your final audio track is correct. So it's not dependent on little bitty pieces of audio coming from different parts of the computer. Then the idea is to send it out for distribution. So that could be as simple as uploading it on YouTube, for example. That's a form of distribution. You can also, if you were in this class maybe 10 years ago, you could be thinking about making a nice, beautiful Blu-ray video. We've got a Blu-ray disc with a nice label and everything, and you can put it in your Blu-ray player and see it in stunning high definition. Whereas if you put it on YouTube, I'm sorry, it's not stunning high definition. It can't be, because you're limited to a data stream. Or of course, you can also put it on DVD and send it off for the four winds or other distribution networks. And so today, it seems like we're becoming limited to streaming video, I'm sorry to say, but that's not the end of the world. It's just the way it's evolving. But one way or another, distribution never ends, meaning that somebody can always say, I want your video, but I want it in this format. And then you go back to your stuff and change it. Part of post-production, in my post-production world, involves archiving. I archive my stuff to death. I make sure that I have everything that I need in some permanent archive somewhere, usually stored on optical discs so that they can't short out. Meaning that as long as I have a means of playing the discs, I've got them all. And so that's me. Not everybody does that. But there you are. And so that will give you a finished product. And once again, if you've done it right, you get a beautiful reward, which is a finished product that you can be happy with. If you do it wrong, it becomes very obvious that you've done it wrong. And so I've actually seen people go through all these phases of production within minutes if they're literally at the last minute. So they'll say, let's go out and shoot this, and then they'll go running. So their entire pre-production strategy was, let's go out and shoot this, which means basically they've got no real idea what they're going to shoot, but they're running. And then they're out there shooting whatever it was they said they were going to shoot, which since they haven't planned it isn't going to be anything interesting. And then they're coming back and, well, let's edit this. And since they have no plan for what they were going to shoot in the first place, they're not going to edit anything better than what they shot. Usually they're just going to leave it in one long take and then claim that they finished. And so that's not producing anything. That's not making a living. That's not creating anything. On the other hand, if you've got an idea in your heart that you really want to do, if you do it right, you can have something that actually matters. You know, something that can live on after you, something that you can put in your portfolio and say, I produce this. And other people can say, I like that. And of course, you'll get people that say, I don't like it, but at least it's there. Okay, so those are the phases of production, and you will be expected to understand details about how the production process works.